Here I'll be. So with that, I'm looking forward to discussion, which I know mimics the form I just made fun of, which is that I talk and then you can comment. But so it's not questions. Challenge me, argue with me, do with me as you will.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Great. I have to laugh a little bit at that because I just watched your recent, I think it was a TEDx talk, which I actually sent out to all the people on this call, where you start out by saying this is bullshit that I'm on the stage and that you're in the audience. That was a very, very informative way to kick off that talk. So, all right. Well, as per usual, I'm going to steal a bit of the participants' thunder by getting to ask the first question. And I wanted to try and, I mean, there's lots and lots of questions coming in around content as a form and what you think about that. I guess just digging into a lot of what you've talked about. But I'm really curious about some of the practicality of your ideas and advice, and specifically, I've been following the kind of the progress or the arc of the Journal Register company, and I'm just wondering if you can speak to your experiences there a little bit as an advisor, maybe for the participants on the call that aren't familiar with it.
Sure.
Just kind of talk to what they have done and why it's kind of an important experiment in journalism, and specifically if you can, I don't know if you have firsthand experience of the Newsroom as Cafe idea actually implemented by them, and whether that kind of collaboration between community and journalism is working.
Journal Register was the most fucked up newspaper company in America, and considering that the entire industry is screwed, that said a lot. It was bankrupt, it was abandoned, it was abused, and then it got taken over by its hedge funds, and they installed a man named John Payton as CEO. And John is quite remarkable. He's a Canadian who then put together the roll-up of Imprimedia, all the largest Spanish language publications in the U.S., and he made them profitable by going digital first, print last. And he's doing the same now at Journal Register. And what that really means is that he recognizes fully that digital is the future. Print brings in the money today, but he is moving toward a day when he can turn off the press. And so that means that when journalists come in, the first thing they do is tell the world what they know using tools like Twitter. The article becomes a byproduct of that later in the process. The same for business. He knows he has to drive his advertisers and his audience online and push that. By the way, I just saw that Axel Springer, the German publisher, today announced that they now have more digital advertising than print advertising dollars. It's a big deal. So these companies are trying to drive to become truly digital companies. Alan Rusbridger of The Guardian is also arguing this as well. So a few examples of this. One is in Torrington, Connecticut at the, whatever the hell the paper is there. They were in a space that was ungodly awful. Charles Dickens would have been appalled how awful it was. And Payton moved them out in a new space at street level and opened the door, and they have a cafe of sorts. They have a coffee machine, but people are always free to come in, sit down, sit in on the news meetings, use the internet there, talk with reporters. That at some level could just be symbolic, but I think it's more than that. I think that it really does open up the community. John Payton is also on the board of Post Media in Canada, where I'm also an advisor, and they are moving similarly to digital first. And during their recent national election, they had the reporters out in the field, just to give a different example, were told not to write articles. They were only to feed in using the tools, Twitter, YouTube, etc., Tumblr, all day, what was going on. And then there was a twin back in headquarters. In my day, we would have called this sexistly a rewrite man, who would turn this stuff into big, real blog posts, narratives, and then finally into articles by adding things like background paragraphs. Well, that starts to change the form and structure of where you go, that if you truly think digital first, then you tell the world what you know when you know it, and you drive to that world. And yes, the print still has a role for now, while it is still economically viable, but that's as a byproduct.
Super. And I'm just going to ask the people on the call, can you hear me? Some people were saying they couldn't hear me. I know you can, Jeff, but if I'm too, yeah, you can hear me okay now? Okay.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yay, good. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Excellent. Well, there's a ton of questions here that have flown in, so I'm just going to try and group a few of them together, and hopefully we can get through as many as possible. And I'm just going to keep asking until you basically, as you slump on the desk there. Okay, so the first one is Julian Dora asks, isn't content in quotes such a broad word or term that it becomes hard to use it effectively as a thinking tool?
I think that's exactly right. And content is so broad that people imbue in it their own vision of what they do. So to most people in my business, content is an article under a headline, on a publication, on a page that we control. And the other problem with content becomes that it becomes an exploitive word too, in the notion of user-generated content. Oh, we'll get all those people to generate stuff so we don't have to, so it's cheap for us. And I think that's a problem. So, yeah, it'd be hard to get away from the word content because, do we have another word for snow in this? I don't think we do. But I think you're absolutely right that we have to be careful about the assumptions that underlie the word when someone uses it.
Great. And just a note for you, Jeff, and also for everybody on the call that we have been Andy Carvined. He seemed to pick up on some of your quotes during this lecture that were coming out of the live tweeting, and now he is live tweeting. He's retweeting the live tweeting of this lecture, which is quite a broad audience. So, all right. So the next question is, basically, how do you make this mind shift from content is king to relationships? Has content basically become a commodity?
I love working with a smart group. Two questions. Is content a commodity? If I say yes, I'll be in trouble, but as my old friend Jay Rosen said when I asked him whether he gets in trouble saying controversial things, fuck him, I got tenure. So, yes, content is a commodity. It needn't be. There is valuable content. The other way to look at it is, this has always been true, information is a commodity. Once you know something, it's known, it's spreadable. You cannot control that. You cannot put that in a box. So the fact that you can put a treatment of information, an article, in a box and control that does not mean that the core value of it is not, in fact, open and, free. So, yes, if you can add value in terms of time, Tom Gloser, the head of Reuters, says that his content is most valuable, and he means this, in the first 3 milliseconds of its life, because it's trading information. After that, it's all additive value that he managed to extract after the fact. So if you can add value in time, if you can add value in treatment, great writing, great perspective, fine. Maybe you can even charge for it. Fine, but that's not a business model, I don't think. Because of this reason that the true value in it is information, can be spread. That's why we have a First Amendment. It will be spread if it has any value to people, and thus it's a commodity. So how do you change this notion of relationships? Well, I think you have to learn from Zuckerberg, and he is key in, plug, my book. I got to interview him, and I think what he sees is that the content that he finds value in is the content that creates signals about people. Now, we can get controversial about that and privacy and all that stuff, but let's put that off to another discussion. But I think that that's absolutely right. So that if you're let's say, a local news organization, you actually are in a great position, if you rethink what you do, to have people generate signals about what they need, what they know, what they want to know, what they don't know, who they are, where they are, what they like, what they buy, all these great things, and you can use that to then serve them better. Not to exploit it just to make money for yourself. That's the wrong way to look at it. If you serve them better, you too will succeed. And so if you created a platform company in a town, I would say that the way you change to relationships, for example, is to create platforms that enable people to share what they know and what they want to know and to add value to that. And that puts relationships first, content last.
Great. Gonna have one more quick question on quote-unquote content, and then we're gonna jump into tweets, although I'm not implying any type of differentiation, just a topic change. So Ted Hahn asks, content models have to comport or comply or fit with analytical models. So how will analytical models work or need to change if this stuff moves around?
By analytical models, you mean business analytical models? I'm not sure what you mean.
I'm guessing he's literally talking about like analytics, like how do we track this stuff, this content as it moves
Oh,
around?
I see. Okay, Google think, right. I don't know, and I rarely say that. I think that's one reason that Tim Berners-Lee is arguing that the more we make data open, the better off we're going to be in figuring that out. I don't think we know it all. If you look at Texas Tribune and what they've done with data and how it's become very popular, I think that starts to give us a little window on what this begins to look like, that people go find what they want to find, and you can analyze that and figure out what matters to them and what spreads. I think that part of what we're trying to do in the project on the Andy Carvin tweets at CUNY is to understand that the first value that Andy added, I think, is the creation of the nodes and networks, is finding the people who were really there, who knew what they were talking about, who were reliable, who were known by someone else, even in a world where identity was dangerous. That's a key value, and that's an analytic which is not about page views. Part of the problem, too, I think, is that we are measuring the wrong things. Score is skewing where our future goes, as I said before, because we think people have to come to a site. We think that gross audience is the right notion. The key myth of print business model and broadcast business model that made it successful was the notion that every reader and every viewer saw every ad, thus you could charge for every reader and every viewer. The internet makes a lie of that, right? And that's why total audience doesn't matter anymore. The advertiser cares only about the audience they pay for, the audience that actually sees their ad. So the idea through ComScore that we're measuring total audience size is lunatic. It's meaningless. It is sending us on a chase to build something that has no real value. So the analytics there matter too in terms of how we treat how people use this and where they find the value in it. Page views and unique users is bullshit.
Right. So just turning the corner towards the Andy Carvin tweet kind of topic. We have a bunch of questions kind of asking about what's the importance of the future of tweets. So I'll just read them out here. Julian asks, aren't tweets just the new AP, Reuters, AFP, etc.? ?
See, I hate that new old construction. So no, God damn it, no. I don't think so. I think that the key difference here is, again, that the witnesses speak to the world. And that hidden in Twitter is great value. I hope you've seen the story of the University of Indiana computer scientist, I think it was, who did analysis of moods in Twitter, 6 words in Twitter positive and 6 negative, and found that it was 90-some% accurate in predicting ups and downs daily in the Dow Jones. And there's now, of course, a hedge fund based on his algorithms. So there's value in there in terms of seeing what is the country thinking, how are we feeling, what does it matter, that comes out as a byproduct of what we're talking about and whether we're happy or sad. That's not the same as saying that there's a news update, and here it is. So no, I think Twitter is something remarkably new and goes beyond that. Now, I have some fears about Twitter being a closed world and the way that they're treating developers these days, so I'm very happy to see Google Plus come along too, and it's yet a different form. As I tried to figure out where each of these specializes, the taxonomy I came up with, and this is wrong, but it's just directionally, I think that blogging is about writing, Twitter is about broadcasting, Facebook is about relationships, and Google Plus is about sharing, and Tumblr is about quoting. Again, they're all about all those things. That's wrong. But we have to look directionally at how people use these things and then find the value in them, and don't try to put them in old square holes.
Well, defying your dislike of the new-old dichotomy, I'm going to ask another new-old question from Juan, and I'm actually going to group it with John Bell's question here. So Juan asks, if the meme/idea is the new atomic unit of news, are tags their realization? And then I'll just peg onto the end of that. What does support the hashtag mean? If it was a hack to begin with and is only recognized now in a very basic way.
Right. Great questions. I think the tag is one route to cut across silos. By support, I mean that you encourage people to use them and you give them value back. Now, the first most obvious thing is to add search to Google+. It still amazes me that they didn't consider that a necessity for beta launch. But we can't gather around topics, ideas, people, events, because we don't have search. When we do have search, simple word search will not do it. We need to have that notion that someone can put an explicit idea and get people to gather around that explicitness. That can be a tag, it can also be a place, it can be an event, it can be a lot of things. But by supporting it, I would say what Google Plus should do is, number one, put in search. Number two, encourage people to put in tags, whether they're preceded by hashes or not. It doesn't matter. They don't have hashes on blogs, but tags. Do some simple things like some Twitter clients do, helping you fill in the hashtag or suggest a whole bunch that are out there, so you don't have to retype "fuck you Washington" every single time you do it. A little bit of convenience. Those kinds of things would be supporting it. By support, I suppose I probably should better say encourage. And the advantage to Google then is that it can cut into that space in Twitter. And I should say, by full disclosure here, is that I'm a nano investor in Uber Media, Bill Gross's company. And I see some advantage in him being able to be Uber both these worlds, and we can start to gather around topics across multiple platforms and silos.
Great. And it kind of made me think immediately of another thing here, but well, I'll ask it quickly and then I'll jump on to the next question, which is related to Google+. But talking about the across silo kind of task or challenge, I noted when I was just looking up your connection to the Journal Register company that you also have a connection to Gina Trapani. So I'm just wondering what you think of kind of the tools of that ilk, of the think up at style tool that tries to make sense of some of the social world.
Very important. The reason that I have this Madonna mic is because Gina has one too. We're both on This Week in Google, which I recommend highly. Leo Laporte is a wonder, and I get recognized from doing that more than anything else. I was on the streets of New York yesterday. Somebody had headphones in and they stopped and they said, "I'm listening to you right now." So This Week in Google is great, and that's how I've gotten close to Gina, who is a wonder. I think that Gina is magnificent, and ThinkUp app is exactly the kind of thing we need to try to grab these platforms and get new value out of them and enable people to do new things with them. And it's funny, I've been more critical of Twitter and its relationship to developers than Gina the developer is. Gina says it happens. If the company needs to go do its own thing and now compete with its developers, well, okay, that happens. I get puzzled by that and think that if you're going to grow on the back of developers, then you've got to offer them some covenant of ongoing space, support, freedom to do things, and that you're not going to start clamping down on them and saying you can't do these things because we're going to do it now. But Gina is a perfect example of where to go, because Gina looks for needs and opportunities. And that's the engineer's way to life. It's not to look at what we want to do first, or it's not to look at product bases first. It says, where's a problem, and I'm going to go solve that. And that's what Gina does brilliantly.
Great. So just to jump off on, I mean, you were really kind of on a riff there about Google Plus and what it's missing. And Nick asks, now that we have Google Plus, does it seem like Google made the right business decision connecting employees' bonuses to the success of social?
You know, social, now that you mention it, is a word just as broad as content. Right? What the hell does social mean? You know, antisocial is easier to define. It means when you're not being social. But everything else is social. So, yeah, I think that in the war over signal generation, Google stands at a disadvantage to Facebook, and to some extent even to Twitter, limited, and elsewhere. So Google has to get better at getting us to generate signals. And I think their key tool in that is actually not so much Google Plus as it is Android. And Android will be an incredible tool for us going around and revealing where we are, what we want, where we're headed, and all these great things. Google Plus is part of that. You know, I got to be careful here, because I, along with Gina Trapani, said that Wave was going to change the world and be this great tool for journalism. Never mind. And so I thought it was really important, and I was wrong. We weren't wrong. It just means that we got a little bit ahead of ourselves and ahead of Google. So I don't know what Plus is going to be. I don't know. I've found that I'm using it a little bit less this week than the last, but I really do like the energy of it. I like how it's always there, and I think that I have the faith in Google that they will find the ways to tweak it and make it ever better. And that's part of what it means to be social, but the larger definition of social, I think, is that the business relies on signals. In Google's, I think it's called Think Mag, their new kind of advertorial magazine they put out online, one of the top ad executives said that 80% of all advertising soon will be live and personal. And what that means is the whole notion of a static ad next to static content is 20%, is dead. And if you think about what it means to be a live ad and personal, it means that it has signals from you to give you what you want and need right now wherever you are. That's an entirely different view of advertising, and so the social feeds that kind of business model.
Great. So we have, I'm going to switch tacks again here and kind of move into questions of innovation. And specifically, there's a lot of questions from participants about their upcoming pitch that they're preparing as their final project. So we'll go kind of high level and then we'll drill down. Salim Khan asks a very fun question here. He says, Jeff, I asked you 6 years ago in Toronto, how do you push through a radical reinvention of news inside a news organization? Then you said do it on your own. What about now? There's more appetite for change, but conservative approaches still dominate.
It is not impossible to bring change within an organization. That's why I get so excited by seeing John Payton. Mark Potts, who tried to start Backfence and Growth Spur, said a while ago, why did it take 15 years for us to get our John Payton in news? So it is possible to do it inside an organization, but it's nearly impossible. And so that's why I now teach entrepreneurial journalism, is because I want to enable and encourage people to build new things. And I realized recently that we're probably starting two different kinds of businesses. Reid Hoffman helped me understand this. There are entrepreneurial platform businesses that are disruptive and change things, and then there are content businesses. And yes, content still has a place and still has a role, and you can use known models to do that. But I think that the disruption that's going to come is not going to come from within. And so, yes, my advice stands, which is rare. Usually I change my mind over that amount of time and I get shown up.
Great. So I'm going to group the next two questions together, so I'll just read them both and let you kind of answer in whatever order suits. But they're both related specifically to these pitches. So Amy Zerba asks, when brainstorming for ideas, you spoke about sustainability and business models. Should we be thinking about business models at the start? Your book suggests not to right at the start, but that's what news orgs want in a pitch. So
right.
That's part one. And I'll just jump into, Travis asked a similar question. He says, we're pitching to news organizations. Are they the wrong people to be pitching the future of news to, given they're embedding in old ways of thinking and relating?
Yeah. Answer the second. Oh, that's the problem with two questions. People always answer the second one first and then forget the first one. So let me try to, I'll answer the second one first because it's easy. Yes, I think you are presenting to those organizations is God's work. Because maybe you will change some minds and have them get the scales off their eyes and see something new. And so that's important. But no, you should be pitching to funders as it goes. Now back to the business model question. Yes, I did say that in the book, where if you look at Google, Skype, Facebook, all these companies, they first built a great service, built a large network, became scalable, and then figured out the business. And generally, yeah, that's the right way to go. But you've got to figure out the business insofar as it's worth an investment. You've got to figure out the value. Another way to put this is, and by the way, presentation skills is very important. And we have this now. We're about to get approved, knock on wood, for the country's first MA degree in entrepreneurial journalism, and we've just graduated our first certificate students. And many of you are welcome to apply at the program at CUNY. And one thing we learned this last term is that I don't teach presentation skills well enough. I've got to bring in somebody who really teaches that because it is such a skill. Now, the problem with presentations is that it can take over your entire thinking, that it's all about the PowerPoint slides, and it's not. The other problem I found in our businesses is that we take students through the phase of ideation, but we don't really take them to the point of investment, because what they need in the middle is a prototype. Now, you guys can build prototypes, and so that you're way ahead, but my students, not all of them can. Some can. So I'm getting students who just graduated, a few of them, through next to the next stage of prototype so they can go to funders. In terms of the presentation itself, the key mistake I see people make is starting off by saying, I want to. No one except your mother gives a shit what you want to do. That's not what this is about. It starts with the world needs a problem and my solution. That you see an opportunity and you're going into it. And so that starts with where you're headed. The second thing is very clearly elevator pitch. And it's great that you all did your 256 character, and almost all of them are very, very good and very, very clear. But I find that very often folks get lost in the weeds, and the audience in the pitch is sitting there saying, what is this? I can't figure out what it is. And if you lost them at the beginning, you lost them forever. So, if you can't tweet the business, if you can't tweet the product or the service, then you don't really know what it is. Now, there is an argument, too, that says that, well, Twitter didn't know what it was. Twitter just came out with the thing. But Twitter could at least say what it was in essence. And then it became something else because people invented things like hashtags atop it. And the key skill of the entrepreneur and the technologist is to pivot and shift and listen and change. But nonetheless, my advice is really, really friggin' clear elevator pitch, really clear needs statement and how you're answering that need. Then make the product very clear in how it's useful to people, not necessarily news organizations, but to the world. And then some notion of a potential business model for how this is sustainable, because if it's not sustainable, it won't live.
Great. And I mean, kind of perfect segue here into a question from, in fact, one of our lab shepherds. The three folks that we have kind of shepherding the lab along have all started a project called openjournalism.ca, which is trying to rethink or reinvent the way that journalism is taught in schools. So this question comes from Kate. God's work. This question comes from Kate. She asks, well, and it's funny watching the chat. It sounds like basically everybody in this program is probably going to apply to your program at CUNY. Question from Kate. What should we do to encourage journalism students to innovate news, not follow the old ways in university communities, and which non-journalism departments should we target to get involved?
I will first confess my failure at being able to do that in general ways. I also head nominally the interactive journalism program at CUNY. I say nominally because I have great colleagues and they really run it and really teach it. But we haven't pushed the envelopes far enough there. We haven't come up with a way to encourage students, once they've learned the eternal verities and the basics and the understanding and the values, how to experiment boldly. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I think that we absolutely have to do that. We have to encourage that. I'm thinking about maybe trying to get a course in that. The second problem I have with that is that students aren't programmers. And some students say that we should teach them to be Flash programmers or whatever, and I disagree with that. I say that instead they should know how, the way we gradate the tools is by looking at the lowest, sorry if you can hear this cat, it's, I love her dearly, it's the family cat. I'm a dog person, I lost, she's just bugging me, so. The lowest level of knowing a tool is knowing what it can do, why you use it. The next level up is being able to spec something on it. The next level up is being able to adapt something that's been made by someone else in it, and the next level up is being able to make it yourself. And so every tool we look at has these gradations, and I do not think that journalism students, I don't think we can teach them well how to be programmers. So if I've just said before that you need, between ideation and investment and growth, you need the prototype, then you need prototypers. And Arizona State University has done a neat job of having group projects have access to programmer time from the university, and even have money to go hire programmers if the university ones can't do what they want on Craigslist. I think that's a great idea. And so, back to the question of how do we encourage this. That's really the reason that I started the entrepreneurial journalism program. In its genesis, it was trying to get people to create new products. And I realized pretty quickly that it was also about creating new businesses around that, and thinking about that sustainably, and thinking about the audience use, the public's use. Sorry, I didn't mean to say audience. And so one way to get people to think that way is to try to start new things that people really want. So one answer to the question is, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this, how we kind of franchise entrepreneurial journalism teaching out there. It's happening more and more across journalism schools. That's a great thing. Finally, in terms of working with other departments of the school, that's not easy, I've found. We work with the business school associated with us. They're very helpful, but they don't think media. They think in different ways. We got to have people think very disruptively. I'm going to try to start working with the technology arm, but I've also learned there that when I used to work with MIT back in the days, that was difficult to do too, because students want to go their own way. And trying to bring people together to do group projects is very, very difficult. So I guess what I want is a bucket of money to pay developers to work with students on businesses, if I could find any developers, and that's not easy.
Great. So, and a good jumping off point for I have kind of two more classes of questions, and I hope I can continue to, we're going a bit over time, so I hope that's okay with you, Jeff. Let me know if you're,
no problem at all.
Up against any hard
if you hear my stomach growling, that's the only problem.
Well, I see that we still have lots of people kind of anxiously asking questions, but I see some groups here. So, Shaminder asks, and I'm going to change his question up a little bit, but he asks, what is a journalist in this new world? And I'm going to say, please define it in 140 characters.
I won't define it. It doesn't matter. The notion of a definition of journalist, I think, is actually dangerous. The question we should ask is the definition of an act of journalism. And in that sense, anyone can perform an act of journalism. Back to Andy Carvin. All roads lead back to Andy. That when a witness shares something, they are performing an act of journalism. When someone searches on a database at Texas Tribune and tells a reporter about a possible story, that's an act of journalism. It's not the full journalism, but it's a piece of a flow here. And so I think what we have to do is look very broadly and very openly at the notion of what adds to journalism. And I go back, my definition of that is very, very broad. Things that help a community organize its information so it can organize itself. That's my definition for now. I'll probably change it later. Journalist. Now, so why do I teach journalism school and put journalists? Because there is a role, I think, for people who devote themselves to adding value. And so I would say there that a journalist is he or she who adds value to a community's exchange of information. I just made that up before your very eyes.
That was well done, thinking on your feet. Well, so follow-up question referencing Andy Carvin from Ted Hahn. If journalists should be community enablers, how does that change journalistic ethics? If there's direct collaboration between the journalists and listeners, how is Andy Carvin's responsibility different from old school print journalists, and how should that how should that modulate his behavior?
Well, two ways, I think. Number one, before you get to the organization point, Andy does not put out merely facts that are well certified and guaranteed, because he can't. So that Andy's primary job is not to say what he knows, but what he doesn't know. That's the key skill of journalists. Is we thought it was telling the world what we know, capital K. Sorry, the cat closed the door on itself, so now it can't get out, so now it's pissed, so now it's even louder. I like cat. I really do. I like the cat. So saying instead what you don't know is the key to collaboration. It's the key to saying to the public, well, then what do you know? How can you fill this in? So that's the first key skill difference, I think. The second thing is this notion of the journalist being separate from and above the public has been dangerous to journalism's quality, and it hasn't worked. The public doesn't trust us. And there's a reason, because we're haughty and we think we're above it all. And we are instead part of the communities and members of the community. And I've been saying for some time, and David Weinberger then encapsulated it into a tweet, that transparency is the new objectivity. And I know that's a new old thing. But I think that openness is important, and we all do have perspectives. We all do have views of the world. We have experience that differs. And so, I think that to try to transpose this view of objectivity as the ethic of journalism on our new world is wrong-headed. We are members of a community. We do have opinions. We also, though, operate under intellectual honesty. If all we report to you is the things that give our side of the story, then that's dishonest, and that doesn't count as journalism. CJR just slapped the Wall Street Journal around this morning for finally doing a story on Hackygate by trying to argue that, oh, it's been around forever, by pointing to one like $40 payment for a tip from decades ago. Well, that's not intellectually honest of them. That's intellectually dishonest of them, incomplete of them. That's not journalism. We can still look at that in terms of ethics and figure out that that's not very cricket. And that doesn't change. There are, as we say at the journalism school at CUNY, eternal verities of completeness and fairness and accuracy and things like that, and you always strive for that. But if you think of news constantly as a process instead of a product, then you also think that it can always be better, always be more correct, and that's the way you think.
Super. Okay, so final little group of questions here. We're going to shift the focus onto business, and then I will thank you and ask you to hold up your book one more time before you free the cat from the room. So Matt asks, since print pays the publisher's salary, isn't there a conflict of interest to move digital first?
Well, that's the conflict they're operating under because they think it's going to continue to pay its salaries. Knight Ritter's chief just looked at the notion of whether his business would stabilize. Well, there's no such thing as stabilization. If you're thinking about this quarter, then that equation is true. But if you're thinking about the future, if you're honest with yourself, then there is no doubt that print model will continue to deteriorate and do so rapidly. There are more kicks to the kidneys coming here. The reason that there are some publishers who are reducing frequency, which, by the way, makes a lie of the notion that you need a newspaper every day. Well, the reason they're maintaining frequency in these bursts is because there's still value in distribution of especially things like coupons and circulars, called freestanding inserts or FSIs in the jargon. Well, that's going to disappear very soon because as the circulation of newspapers falls below a critical mass, I've talked to those advertisers, a few of them, and they say they're going to desert newspapers at that point. Then goes the next key justification for printing the paper. And so those justifications are going to go, and go. Well, if you know that's going to happen, and all you do is try to hold on to that old world with your fingernails, then it's highly irresponsible. If you know that the future is digital, then you have a fiduciary responsibility to drive the business strategically to that future, which is what John Payton is doing, what he recognizes, and what a few others are doing. And that's the essence of what's wrong with the business. I think we have to go to that idea of driving to the future, even as it affects the present. One example. Back to this notion of the myth of print that every reader sees every ad, thus every reader is valuable and the loss of any reader is a terrible loss. That was the assumption that drove decisions in newspapers for years and years, and to some extent still does. That's why newspapers don't get rid of cartoons, because someone will complain and that person has value. Well, no, that person's value isn't necessarily the same as the next person's value anymore. In 2001, the Star Ledger in New Jersey, and when I used to work with them, got rid of its stock tables. And it saved a net of $1 million a year in print and ink, paper and ink. The total net loss of subscriptions, was 12. That meant that they were paying $83,000 a year to maintain those 12 readers in the belief that every reader was as valuable as the next reader. And that's irresponsible. That's wrong. So by driving more people to the stock tables online, they saved $1 million. Those 12 readers, were probably going to die anyway. And so you had to manage strategically, not tactically. But the problem is that the old company of journalism don't know how to manage strategically, most of them. So that's why they are managing tactically, trying to hold on. The other problem here is Wall Street. The key truth about newspapers and news organizations and about many other companies, including retail, is you're either going to shrink or you're going to grow drastically. Right? In retail, look at Borders. Look at all these stores closing. There's gigantic Amazon, there's gigantic Walmart, there's little stores, and there's nothing in between. The same is going to be true in news, or in media, call it, in ad sales. There's going to be Google, Facebook, AOL, maybe, big companies, and then there's going to be small, hyper-local, hyper-niche, gawkers and stuff like that. And nothing in that big middle range anymore. And I think that's important too. Now, Wall Street, though, would not look kindly at Knight Ridder saying, our strategy is to shrink radically. When you're a public company, the economy is built on growth. Well, that's a whole other question here, and that's really the essence of why we've just gone through what we're going through in Washington, is because we're still basing the economy on assumptions of growth that the internet now makes a lie. Sorry to go a long-winded answer, but this is my next project, I hope. And so it's hard for a company to see itself shrinking down, but that's what it's going to have to do. And companies that are private, Journal Register is owned by a single hedge fund, are in a better position to strategically rethink what their size is.
Great. So, just in the interest of saving your cat, and
No, it's fine. I'll
in the interest of our participants, I know we've gone quite long, but obviously you've kept them wrapped because we've had a solid 60 people listening in from start to finish, so it's great. But I think I'll just finish off with this one question, which is kind of a fun question.
I want to interrupt you for a second. I see Laura here says that you don't have to go to print. I like having a book in my hand. Well, so do I. And I'm a hypocrite about this, right? So if I ate my own dog food, I would have made this printable, clickable, and linkable, and searchable, and spreadable, and all that kind of stuff. Why didn't I? Because the dog, or in this case the cat, has to eat. My kid's going to college, Tufts next year, and I got paid by this. It still works this well. I, too, like holding this. That's true. But there's an economic basis here. I liked horses, but cars were more economical. And so this was really not an emotional question. Get off the emotions here and get to the hard economics of it. And print is wildly inefficient and not sustainable at a mass basis long term against the competition of online. We are shifting from a scarcity-based economy to an abundance-based economy. And like Google, you've got to think about how to manage and benefit from the abundance rather than trying to control and manage the scarcity. Sorry, Laura, but I thought I'd pick on you for that.
No.
I know, she says.
And I'm just going to ask you to hold up the book one more time, and I'm going to ask, how come we can't get it until September?
Because that's the way they operate. It is ridiculous. You know, I sell the rights to the publisher, and that's what they do, and they distribute it and bring me value. This book, man, I didn't deliver it as a beta to my editor. I delivered it as a pre-alpha. I mean, I got great value out of my editor in this. Please retweet that, make him happy. They're promoting it, and they have distribution in bookstores. Though right now there's a lot fewer bookstores in this country. So that has value, and so that's why I did that, and so I went along with the rules of that. The next project I do, I better eat my own dog food, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. The next project I want to do is one about this notion of technology shrinking the economy and everything we do, and that changes fundamental assumptions. Now, I'm not an economist, which may make me more qualified to talk about it, but probably not. I didn't do well in econ class. I fell asleep. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I think that the way I would love to do it is by having a lot of open discussions. And maybe a book comes out of it as a byproduct, but that the real product is talks online, in person, process, and thinking things that way. So I've got to break out of this straitjacket too, but nonetheless, it was really nice. I got checks for this thing. That was nice.
All right, final question here from Rhiannon. Have you, Jeff, read any science fiction books, or science fiction period, I won't put it in a book, that have really good examples of how this new post-Gutenberg journalism could be?
Ooh. No, because I'm reading the internet, not books. I've got to believe that if anybody could do that, Cory Doctorow could. And, there are elements I can remember from things I have read from Cory that start to describe the world. I mean, I forget the title of the book. I'm sure someone in that group will know, where, the world's basically destroyed, and there's one woman who's keeping Google up, and that's the last connection to knowledge that we have. Come on, chat room. Tell me the name of the book. I bet you can.
Not Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, but...
I see. On This Week in Google, we can ask any question of the chat room, and bingo, we can get an answer. Anyway,
come on, Moz News Lab, you're letting me down here.
Yeah, come on, guys. Come on. Well, we need more critical mass. We need a mass. If you open this up to the public, we would have gotten that answer. By keeping it at 60 people, that's the problem. So no, I haven't. But I think that Cory's view of the power of the database and the network and the sysadmin in that process, I think that becomes the new kind of gatekeeper view where media goes. And I got into an argument with somebody recently. It was John Payton, when he said that big media is not dying, ironically, and he was saying that because Facebook and Google. But I don't think they're media companies, because media companies again think that they put out content and product, and I think that the truth of where we're headed here is that we're already in the post-Gutenberg age and don't know it. One last thing. One of the things I write about in here that I love came from a group of Danish researchers at the University of Southern Denmark, one of whom spoke at Berkman Center at Harvard. And they talk about what they call the Gutenberg parenthesis. And that before the parenthesis, before Gutenberg, knowledge was passed along scribally and orally. It was remixed as it went. It had very little sense of authorship and ownership. And then along comes Gutenberg, and everything becomes printed and firm and has a beginning and an end, an alpha and omega. And it makes us think serially in a line. As Marshall McLuhan said, we think serially. This sentence itself was an example of that, not an exact quote. Now, we're coming after the parenthesis. We're coming to another end. And I think that becomes very interesting in how that changes our cognition of the world and how we look at things. And again, it's 1467 in that timetable. We don't know where this world is yet. We're already living it in ways we can't see because we still see things in old analogs. And so it goes back to the main point here is that you guys, all of you, have the opportunity to not do that. You have the opportunity to see things in utterly new ways, and I encourage you to do that because we're in the midst of it already. We just don't know what it is. You do.